Welcome to Sleep Narrations. You've arrived at a quiet place where nothing needs your attention and nothing asks you to stay awake. There is no story you must follow, no detail you need to remember. Everything here is meant to move slowly and gently fade. Tonight, you can simply listen, or you can let the words pass by like distant sounds in the night. The narration will continue on its own at an unhurried pace, designed to soften your thoughts and ease your mind into rest. If you fall asleep, that is perfectly fine. The story does not mind being unfinished. So take a comfortable breath. Allow your body to settle and let the night do what it naturally does. Before the story begins, before time is measured, allow the world to simply be. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to remember. The clock has no power here. Imagine a world without hours, without minutes, without seconds. The day begins when the sun rises and ends when the sun sets. There is no rush, no hurry. The sky changes slowly. The wind moves gently across the land, and nothing is expected. The air is calm. There is no need to check the time. There is no countdown. Only moments, one after the other. The ground beneath you is solid. The stars above are steady, unconcerned with the passing of time. Here, there is no sense of now or later. The world moves at its own pace, without pressure, without deadlines. The fire in the distance flickers softly. Its light doesn't hurry. It burns steadily, not asking for attention, just existing in the moment. People here live without the weight of time. Their days are measured by the rhythms of nature. Their nights are filled with rest, not anticipation. As you listen, there is no need to rush. The story will unfold when it is ready. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts become less urgent. Feel the stillness of this world, where everything happens without hurry. And in this moment, it is enough to simply be. No plans, no expectations, only the quiet unfolding of time, if time even exists. And for now, it is enough to just rest here. The narration begins. Before the sun rose, there were no clocks. There were no ticking sounds marking the minutes, no little hands on a dial pointing toward an unseen future. In those days, the world was measured by the sky, by the land, by the rhythms of nature. Time did not move in straight lines. It was circular, like the seasons. There was no rush to be somewhere, no need to measure the passing of the day. The sun rose when it was ready, and set when it had completed its journey across the sky. Everything followed its own rhythm. The morning wasn't labeled early, and the evening didn't carry the weight of being late. The concept of now was fluid. Time didn't stretch or compress, it simply was. You didn't wake up to an alarm. You woke up when the first light of dawn kissed the earth. The world moved, but it didn't demand your attention. As you moved through your day, there were no hours to count, no deadlines to meet. The movements of the earth, the turning of the sky, the shift of seasons, these were your markers, and they moved at their own pace. There was a different sense of progress in these days. Progress was not measured by how much you could do in a given amount of time. It was measured by what you observed, by what you learned, and by what you experienced. It was measured in moments, not minutes. People lived in harmony with the slow, steady passing of time. The day was long, stretching out in front of them like an endless canvas. There was no need to fill it quickly with tasks or appointments. The animals, the trees, the rivers, they all lived without schedules. They acted in accordance with what the world asked of them, not by what a clock demanded. In the early morning, before the sun crept above the horizon, the air was thick with the promise of the new day, but no one was hurrying toward it. The grass was wet with dew, the earth still cool, as the world held its breath, waiting for the sun to rise. The wind was soft. It moved with purpose, but without urgency. It stirred the leaves gently, but never rushed them. It whispered through the trees, as if telling them secrets only they could understand. The world, without clocks, allowed itself to breathe. There was no tension, no frantic scrambling for moments that were slipping away. There was only the quiet understanding that everything would unfold when it was ready. Even the rivers moved slowly. They didn't rush to meet the sea. They wound through the land with patience, carving paths over centuries, finding their way with grace. Never hurried, never frantic. And in this world, people did not look to the sky with anxiety about what was coming next. They looked up with appreciation for what was already here. The stars above them were steady. They did not rush. They didn't feel the need to explain themselves. They simply were. When the sun set, there was no thought of how many minutes had passed. There was only the knowledge that the world had turned once more, and that was enough. The people, the land, the sky, all of them lived without clocks. They were part of the rhythm of the world, and their lives unfolded in accordance with it. The firelight flickered in the distance. As the night settled in, people gathered around it, not to prepare for the next day, but to simply be present in the moment. There was no rush to finish anything. There was no urgency. There was only the quiet rhythm of life moving, steady and slow, through the land that knew no time. And in this timeless world, everything found its place. The trees grew tall without needing to be measured. The rivers flowed without needing to know where they were going, and the people lived without needing to know what the next day would bring. They lived by the rhythms of the earth, and they understood that in this world, time was not something to control. It was something to feel, something to be a part of. And in this world, there was no rush to finish. There was no rush to start. There was only the rhythm of the world unfolding naturally, slowly and perfectly. The world, before clocks, moved to the rhythm of nature. It was not measured in minutes, but in the rise and fall of the sun, the changing of the seasons, the cycles of the moon. There was no need to hurry. The earth moved slowly, and everything that lived on it followed its pace. The morning arrived gently, not because it was expected, but because it was simply the next part of the cycle. No clock called it to rise. It rose when it was time. As the sun rose, so did life. The birds began their songs. The animals stirred from their sleep. The earth began to warm, and the day unfolded without rush. The sky changed colors slowly, shifting from the cool blue of morning to the warmth of midday. No ticking hands, no urgency to the passing hours. In the forest, the trees did not need a calendar to know when to bloom. They followed their own rhythm. The leaves turned green when the air warmed, and when the time came, they released their seeds to the wind. The rivers flowed at their own pace, moving gently through the land, not concerned with how much time it took to reach the sea. They didn't need to hurry. They didn't need to know where they were going. In this world, the rhythm was not created by humans. It was a natural rhythm, the rhythm of the earth itself. The animals, the trees, the wind, they all followed it. Humans, too, followed this rhythm. Their lives were shaped by the earth's pace, not by a clock or a schedule. They woke with the sun. They rested when the day ended. There was no rush to complete tasks, no deadlines. The work of the day was simply part of the rhythm. The planting, the gathering, the building, they were not done to fill time. They were done because it was the right time. As the day stretched on, it moved at the pace of nature. The heat of noon was followed by the cool of evening, and the quiet of night came without notice. There was no need to watch the sky for the end of the day. It came when it was time. The stars were the markers of the night, steady in their places, following their own rhythm, unhurried, constant, and calm. In this world, the only measure of time was what could be seen and felt, not the ticking of a clock, but the passing of the seasons, the rise and fall of the sun, the movement of the stars. Life moved in harmony with the earth. There was no rush, no need to fill every moment. Everything had its place and its time, but it didn't need to be measured. And in this rhythm, life was allowed to unfold naturally, not forced, not rushed, but in its own time, at the pace of the world. In this world, there were no clocks to rush the passing of time. There were no minutes to count, no hours to measure. Time was not a thing to fill. It was simply something to experience. Each moment was its own, not tied to a series of numbers, not bound by seconds or minutes. Each moment was complete. It stood alone, quiet and whole. People did not think about what came next. They did not wonder how many more moments there were to come. They lived in the present moment, not defined by the ticking of a clock, but by the flow of life around them. The wind would blow gently through the trees, and that was the moment. The sun would cast its light over the land, and that was the moment. The birds would sing their song, and that was the moment. There were no rushes to fill these moments, no need to move faster, to reach the next one. The present was enough. It always was. In this world, moments stretched like an endless fabric. They did not break up into pieces. They didn't snap forward, chasing the next one. They simply followed each other, like waves on the shore, lapping gently against the earth, one after the other. Time was not a race. It was a flow, a stream, unhurried and patient. It wasn't about reaching the end. It was about experiencing the journey, not rushing to the destination. People lived in those moments, and each one was a full story. Each one had meaning, no matter how small. The world was not fragmented by time. It was whole. It was made up of moments, not divided by minutes. There was no need to plan ahead, no pressure to get things done. The world simply unfolded, slowly, gently, in its own time, one moment at a time. In this world, time did not take from you. It gave you everything in its own quiet way, and each moment, no matter how small, was enough. The day would move on, but it never hurried. It simply continued, one moment after another, as it always had. In this world, waiting was not a burden. It was not something to be avoided. It was simply part of the rhythm. When the day came to a close and the sun began to dip below the horizon, there was no rush to fill the evening, no urgency to complete the day's tasks. The night would come when it was ready, and in the waiting there was peace. Time moved in its own way, unhurried and steady. The night didn't demand anything from you. It simply arrived, softly, without warning, and you embraced it. In the stillness of the evening, there was time to think, to reflect, or simply to be. There was no need to fill the silence with anything. It was enough on its own. Waiting did not feel like loss. It did not feel like a waiting for something better, because there was nothing to compare it to. There was only the moment, and in it there was everything. When the wind blew, it wasn't because it was in a hurry. It blew because it was time for the trees to listen, for the earth to breathe, for the world to move just enough. Waiting in this world was not passive. It was not an empty space. It was a space full of anticipation, but not impatience. It was the space between breaths, between moments, where time stood still, but nothing felt lacking. People sat and watched the stars rise. They watched the sky darken, and in the waiting, there was wonder. There was no sense of now or later. There was just the sense of being here, in this space, with the world unfolding at its own pace. Nothing needed to be hurried. Nothing needed to be completed. There was only the night, and the waiting, and the slow unfolding of everything around you. In the stillness, the quiet waiting felt like a part of life itself. There was no frustration in it, no rushing to fill the space with noise or action. There was only the slow, steady pulse of time, moving without urgency, waiting for the next moment to arrive when it was ready. And in that waiting, there was peace. There was a sense that everything was just as it should be. Not too early, not too late, but exactly when it was meant to be. Waiting was not something to fear. It was a gentle thing, a way to be present, a way to move with the flow of the world, not against it. And in this world, waiting was not empty. It was full of life, full of experience, full of the world unfolding in its own time. In a world without clocks, there were no clear markers to tell you when one moment ended and another began. Time was something felt, not something measured. But even in this timeless world, there were signs, small shifts in the landscape that suggested something was changing. The sky lightened in the morning and darkened at night. The animals moved with the rhythm of the seasons, and the trees began to bud, then bloom, then release their leaves. For the first time, humans started to notice the patterns. The sun rose every day and set every evening. The moon cycled through its phases. The stars moved across the sky, always in the same order. At first, they didn't name these patterns. They didn't need to. They were simply part of the world. But slowly, as the seasons changed and the animals followed their own rhythms, humans began to feel the passage of time in a new way. They began to notice the changes in the sky, the warmth of the sun, the growing and withering of plants. The world began to feel different. It was no longer just a series of moments, but a series of moments connected together. For the first time, humans understood that there was a rhythm to life, not just a sequence of events. It wasn't about moving through time quickly. It was about noticing the shifts, recognizing that things changed, and understanding that change was inevitable. They saw that the leaves would fall in the autumn, and that new buds would appear in the spring. The sun would move across the sky, and the stars would return to their places every night. The idea of time wasn't a hard concept yet. It wasn't about seconds and minutes. It was about the rhythms of nature. It was about understanding that things came and went, and that they always returned. But as they watched, they began to realize something more. This world without clocks wasn't timeless. It was in motion. It was changing. It was moving in its own slow rhythm, but it was moving nonetheless. And in that understanding, humans took the first steps toward measuring time. They began to mark the changes in the sky, the movement of the stars, the rise and fall of the sun. They began to name the seasons and notice when certain things happened. But even then, it wasn't about counting. It was about remembering. It was about recognizing patterns. And slowly, over time, the concept of time began to take shape. It was no longer just something felt. It was something named. But even as they named it, it was still soft, still in its infancy. It was not a rigid force yet. It was still flowing, still changing, still part of the natural rhythm of life. In this world, time was something you moved with, not something you conquered. It was a gentle force, a part of the world, not separate from it. And in this realization, humans began to understand something deep. That time wasn't a master over them. It was a companion. And just as they followed the sun, the moon, and the stars, they would follow time, but at their own pace. In this world, there was no pressure to be somewhere, no constant reminder of what needed to be done by a certain time. There were no deadlines to meet, no ticking clock reminding you of what you were supposed to accomplish. Time didn't rush you. There was no need to speed through your day. No anxious glance at the sky to see how much time was left. The sun moved at its own pace, and you moved with it. In this world, there was no rush to finish anything. You didn't have to get everything done by the end of the day. There was no pressure to move faster. No feeling that time was slipping away. The world simply unfolded in its own time. You worked, but you didn't work against time. You moved with the flow of the earth, not in opposition to it. And when the work was done, you rested. There was no feeling of must or need. There was only the simple knowing that everything would get done when it was ready. The world worked in its own rhythm, and humans moved with it. There was no urgency, There was no frantic race to the finish line. There was only the natural unfolding of life, one moment at a time. Even in the busiest of times, there was a sense of calm. You did not rush because there was no rush. The tasks you completed were not for the sake of time, but for the sake of the world around you. You worked when the time was right, not when the clock demanded it. In this world, the evening did not mean you had to stop, but it was a time to rest, to pause, to let the world settle. You didn't stop what you were doing because the clock told you to. You stopped because the day had ended, because the world had turned, and because rest was natural. And when the night fell, it didn't mean there was something you had to finish tomorrow. It simply meant the world was quiet, and it was time to rest in the quiet of the night. There was no stress in the waiting, no pressure to get back to work when the sun rose. There was just the gentle knowing that everything would happen when it was ready, and that was enough. The people, the land, the sky, they all lived without deadlines. And in that freedom, they were at peace. They didn't rush to fill the space with productivity. They moved with the rhythms of life, and in that movement, there was contentment. They had no need to measure success by how much had been done. They measured it by how much they had lived, by how much they had experienced, by how much they had simply been. In this world, time wasn't something to fill. It was something to flow with. And in that flowing, everything found its place. Everything came when it was ready, and nothing was forced. But as the world moved, something began to change. It wasn't a sudden shift, but a gradual one. The patterns were noticed, and humans began to see the repetition in them. The seasons came and went in their own rhythm, and with every passing year, humans began to feel the ebb and flow of time more clearly. It was no longer enough to simply wait for the sun to rise. It was no longer enough to follow the rhythm of the seasons. Now, humans began to mark it, to make sense of the world through the language of time. The first signs of clocks began to appear, not as machines to control time, but as tools to help humans understand it. These were simple instruments, measuring the cycles of the day, tracking the phases of the moon. There was no urgency in these first clocks. They didn't rush. They didn't force humans into a new way of living. They simply gave humans something to refer to, a way to understand the world's rhythm more clearly. But as the years passed, the concept of time began to change. What was once a gentle rhythm became more defined. It became something to measure, something to track, and with that came the idea of planning, of organizing the day. No longer was the world governed only by the sun and moon. Now, humans began to make their own time, to shape it, to fit their needs. The seasons were no longer the only markers of the year. Now, there were festivals, meetings, and moments that had to be remembered. The sense of freedom that once came with waiting, with allowing life to unfold naturally, began to fade. The rhythm of nature was no longer enough. Now, the rhythm of life was measured by clocks. People began to structure their lives around these new measures of time. They planned their days, counted the hours, and learned to work within the confines of a clock. The rhythm of nature still had its place, but it was now framed by the ticking of a clock. There was no longer a choice about how time passed. Now, time passed according to a plan, according to a schedule. People moved through their days, aware of the seconds, the minutes, the hours. But this shift didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, like the sun moving across the sky, like the changing of the seasons. In the beginning, time was something you felt. Then it became something you measured. And before long, it became something that measured you. People had learned to follow the natural rhythm of the earth. Now, they were learning to follow a rhythm that was set by a clock. A rhythm that could be controlled. This was the beginning of a new way of life. A way where time was not just something you experienced, but something you could control. As time moved forward, as humans began to measure it, there was something that was lost. Something quiet, something simple. Before clocks, before schedules, life was not defined by minutes and hours. It was defined by the rhythms of the earth, the seasons, the rise and fall of the sun. It was defined by the present moment, not by what was to come, but by what was here, right now. But as clocks began to tick, as schedules were set, something changed. We began to rush through life, to race against the clock. We no longer lived in the moment, but in the future. We became obsessed with the ticking hands, with the numbers, with the passing of seconds and minutes, and in that obsession, we lost something important. We lost the simplicity of waiting, the joy of being present in the moment, of watching the world unfold without the need to hurry. We lost the peace that came with doing things not because they were required, but because they were the natural next step. We lost the quiet of the night, the stillness that came with not having to prepare for tomorrow. The night became a time to plan, to anticipate what was to come, not just to rest and be still. In the rush to measure time, we lost the sense of timelessness, the idea that time could simply unfold without pressure, without the constant need to track it, without the need to control it. We lost the ability to wait without impatience, to watch the world change without feeling like we were falling behind. We lost the space to be still, to be present without the pull of a deadline. And perhaps, most importantly, we lost the simplicity of life itself. The world had its own rhythm, a rhythm that was natural, slow, but full. Now we find ourselves rushing, running against time. But in that rush, we miss the quiet, the peace that came with living without a clock. We miss the simplicity of being, of existing in the moment, without the constant pull of what comes next. In the search to control time, we lost the ability to experience it fully. We lost the ability to simply be. And so, as we look back, we might ask ourselves, what did we lose when we lost the rhythm of the world? What did we lose when we began to measure time? Perhaps, in the end, the greatest thing we lost was the very sense of time itself. The soft, unfolding rhythm of life, moving at its own pace. That we can never get back, and maybe we don't need to. But it's something worth remembering, something worth feeling. And now, as the night falls around you, there is nothing left to do. No clock to watch, no task to complete. Just the quiet of the moment. Let the stillness wash over you. Let the world around you breathe, as it always has, moving at its own pace, without hurry, without rush. In this moment, you are enough. You don't need to measure anything. You don't need to track the time. You are simply here, breathing. Feel the world's rhythm, moving gently around you. The soft movement of the earth, the steady rise and fall of the sun, the steady heartbeat of nature, slow and sure. And as you listen, remember that in this world, time is not something to be controlled. It is something to move with, to feel, to experience, without the pressure of what's next. The world has its own rhythm, and you are a part of it. You don't need to hurry. You don't need to catch up. You are simply part of this slow, steady unfolding. As the night deepens, let go of the need to plan, to push, to measure. Let the quiet fill the spaces inside of you. Let yourself rest in the peace of this moment. And when the morning comes, you will greet it at your own pace, with no sense of urgency, only the gentle unfolding of another day, another moment to simply be. For now, let yourself be at peace. Let the world move, and you move with it, at your own pace, in your own time. And when you are ready, sleep will come gently, as it always has. And when you wake, the world will still be here, waiting gently for you to move with it again.